Hey guys, before the video starts, I want to say that I added a join button where you can become member of Mr. Prodanov's family. And also, to all those who are new, feel free to subscribe. It can help a lot. I found an old friend on a dark web missing persons list. Now they're in my house. Hey, Reddit. I'm posting here because I don't know where else to go. This story is long, twisted, and disturbing. I've been a lurker here for years, but I never thought I'd be the one sharing something so messed up. Bear with me. This is going to be a ride. It all started a couple of months ago. I was bored one night, scrolling through random forums and websites. I've always been into weird stuff, and my curiosity often leads me to the darker corners of the internet. That night, I stumbled upon a link to the dark web. I know. It's dangerous and stupid, but like I said, curiosity. I ended up on a site dedicated to missing persons. It was eerie. A lot of these cases had photos, names, dates, and last known locations. Most of them were sad and unsettling, but one photo caught my eye and froze me in place. It was my old friend, Jason. Jason and I were close in high school, but we lost touch after graduation. Seeing his face there, under the title, Missing Since 2017, sent chills down my spine. According to the site, he vanished without a trace right after we graduated. I felt a mix of guilt and confusion. How did I not know about this? Why hadn't anyone told me? I couldn't just let it go. I reached out to some old friends, but no one had heard from him in years. Most of them didn't even know he was missing. The more I dug, the more disturbing it got. His social media accounts were inactive. His phone number was disconnected, and his family had moved out of town years ago. It was like he vanished from the face of the earth. That's when I made a horrible decision. I went back to the dark website and contacted the admin, asking for more information about Jason. A few days later, I got a response. The admin sent me a zip file with photos, videos, and documents related to Jason's disappearance. It was a treasure trove of horrifying details. The photos were the worst. They showed Jason in various stages of life, but the more recent ones were different. He looked gaunt, terrified, and was often seen in dark, grimy rooms. One video showed him tied to a chair, begging for help, his voice hoarse from screaming. The background was nondescript, just a bare room with concrete walls. But his eyes, I can't unsee the fear and desperation in his eyes. Among the documents was a journal, supposedly written by Jason. The entries were disjointed, filled with paranoia and fear. He talked about being watched, followed, and then eventually captured. The last few entries were incoherent scribbles, like he was losing his mind. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. I felt responsible for not knowing about Jason's fate, and I wanted to help him, even though I had no idea how. I decided to investigate further, hoping to find some clue that the authorities missed. I followed the few leads I had, which led me to an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. When I got there, the place was deserted. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. I searched around, finding nothing but dust and broken furniture. Just as I was about to give up, I heard a faint noise, like someone crying. My heart pounded as I followed the sound to a locked door. I managed to break it open, and what I saw inside will haunt me forever. Jason was there, but he wasn't the same. He was emaciated, filthy, and his eyes were wild with fear and madness. He didn't recognize me at first, but when he did, he broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I rushed to untie him and get him out of there. As soon as we were outside, he kept saying, "They're watching us. They'll come for us." I tried to calm him down, but he was inconsolable. We got back to my place, and I let him shower and gave him some clean clothes. I called the police, but they didn't seem to take me seriously. They said they'd send someone over, but hours passed and no one came. Jason was paranoid, jumping at every little noise. He refused to talk about what happened to him, only repeating that they would find him. I tried to reassure him, but deep down, I was scared too. That night, I heard noises outside my house. When I looked out the window, I saw shadows moving in the darkness. I locked all the doors and windows, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. Around midnight, the power went out. Jason started to panic, saying they had found us. I grabbed a flashlight and tried to keep calm. We huddled in the living room, listening to the sounds of footsteps outside, the soft whispers, and then nothing. Just when I thought it was over, there was a loud bang on the front door, followed by more bangs all around the house. Jason screamed, saying they were here to take him back. I grabbed a kitchen knife, ready to defend us, but deep down, I knew we were screwed. That's when I heard the police sirens. The banging stopped, and the shadows disappeared. The power came back on, and Jason and I were left in stunned silence. The police finally arrived, and we told them everything. They searched the area, but found no one. They said it was probably just some kids messing around, but I knew better. Jason stayed with me for a few days, but he was never the same. He was always looking over his shoulder, flinching at every noise. Then one morning, I woke up, and he was gone. No note, no sign of struggle, nothing. It was like he vanished into thin air. I reported him missing again, but there's been no word. Sometimes I hear those noises outside my house, the whispers, and I know they're still watching me. I don't know who they are, but I know they're real. And they took Jason. I'm posting this here as a warning. If you ever find someone you know on a dark web missing persons list, don't go looking for them. You might not like what you find, and you'll never be the same. Stay safe, Reddit. I'll update if anything else happens, but for now, I'm just trying to survive. Hey Reddit, I'm back with an update. If you haven't read my first post, you might want to check it out to understand what's going on. Things have gotten worse. Much worse. I haven't slept properly in days, and every shadow feels like it's hiding something sinister. Here's what happened since Jason disappeared from my house. A few days after Jason vanished, I started noticing odd things around my house. It started small, items out of place, doors slightly ajar that I knew I had closed. I chalked it up to my paranoia, but it kept getting worse. One night, I woke up to the sound of someone whispering my name. I bolted upright, heart pounding, but there was no one there. I began to feel like I was being watched constantly. It was an oppressive sensation, like eyes were on me every second. The whispers grew more frequent, and sometimes I could catch snippets of words. They were always about Jason, about me, and about something coming. I tried to ignore them, but it's hard to ignore something that feels so real. Then the dream started. I'd dream of the warehouse where I found Jason, only it was more twisted. The walls were covered in blood, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. I'd see Jason, emaciated and terrified, reaching out to me, begging for help. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't reach him. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the whispers echoing in my ears. One night, I decided I needed to find out more about the people who had taken Jason. I went back to the dark website, hoping to find some clues. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A link to a live feed. My hands shook as I clicked on it, half expecting it to be nothing. Instead, it showed a dark room with a single chair in the center. I felt sick to my stomach. The camera quality was grainy, but I could make out a figure tied to the chair. My heart stopped when I realized it was Jason. He was barely conscious, head lolling to the side. The room looked similar to the one I found him in, but there were no distinguishing features, just cold concrete walls and a single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling. I watched in horror as someone entered the frame. They were wearing a mask, the kind you see in horror movies, featureless and white. They walked up to Jason and started whispering in his ear. Jason flinched, trying to pull away, but he was too weak. The masked person then turned to the camera, staring directly at me, as if they knew I was watching. They held up a sign with my address written on it. I slammed my laptop shut, heart racing. How the hell did they know where I lived? Panic set in. I checked all the locks, grabbed a kitchen knife, and sat in the living room, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed, and nothing. But the sense of dread didn't leave. The next day, I found a package on my doorstep. There was no return address. I took it inside, hands trembling as I opened it. Inside was a single item, a USB drive. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I plugged it into my laptop, and a single video file appeared. The video was another live feed. It showed the inside of my house, from the perspective of my living room. I could see myself, knife in hand, sitting on the couch, looking terrified. Someone had been inside my house, filming me. The realization made my skin crawl. I felt violated, exposed. I called the police again, but they didn't seem to take it seriously. They sent a couple of officers who looked around, but they found no signs of forced entry. They chalked it up to me being paranoid. I tried to show them the video, but the file was corrupted. It was like it never existed. Things escalated from there. I started getting phone calls from unknown numbers. Whenever I answered, all I heard was breathing and faint whispers. The whispers were always the same. "We're coming for you." I stopped answering my phone, but the calls didn't stop. They left voicemails, each one more disturbing than the last. One night, I heard a noise coming from the basement. I grabbed my knife and cautiously made my way down the stairs. The basement was pitch black, and the air felt colder than usual. I flicked on the light, and there, in the middle of the floor, was another package. My name was scrawled on it in what looked like blood. I opened it, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Inside was a small blood-stained notebook. The first page had a single sentence, written in Jason's handwriting. "They're inside the house." My blood ran cold. I felt a presence behind me and spun around, knife raised, but there was no one there. I raced back upstairs, my mind in a frenzy. How could they be inside the house? I checked every room, every closet, but found nothing. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. They seemed to be coming from the walls, the floor, the very air around me. I couldn't escape them. Desperate, I decided to leave. I packed a bag and headed for the door, but it wouldn't open. It was like someone had locked me inside. I tried the windows, but they were sealed shut. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. That's when I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone was walking through my house. I followed the sound, knife in hand. ready to defend myself. The steps led me to my bedroom, where the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and froze. Jason was there, standing in the middle of the room. He looked different, healthier, but his eyes were empty, soulless. He stared at me, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "They're here," he said, his voice a chilling whisper. Before I could react, everything went dark. I felt a sharp pain in my head, and then nothing. I woke up in my bed, the morning sun streaming through the window. For a moment, I thought it was all a nightmare, but the whispers were still there, faint but present. I checked my phone. No calls, no voicemails. The package and notebook were gone. I don't know what's happening to me, Reddit. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Jason is gone, but the whispers remain. They're getting louder, and I know they're coming for me. I don't know how much longer I can take this. I'll update if anything else happens. For now, I'm just trying to stay sane. Hey Reddit, I'm back with what I hope will be my final update. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, and I'm honestly terrified of what might happen next. If you've stuck with me this far, thank you. I hope my story can be a warning to anyone thinking about delving into the dark web. Here's what happened since my last post. After waking up from what felt like a horrible nightmare, I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, but the whispers were still there, haunting me day and night. I started seeing shadows moving just out of the corner of my eye, and every time I turned around, there was nothing there. I was living in constant fear, barely eating or sleeping. A week after the last incident, I decided I needed to get out of town. I packed a bag and planned to stay with a friend a few hours away. Just as I was about to leave, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking. "Why are you leaving?" A distorted voice replied. "You can't escape us." I dropped the phone and bolted for the door. As I fumbled with the lock, the power went out again. The house was plunged into darkness, and I could hear the whispers growing louder, filling the air around me. I grabbed my flashlight and knife and ran out of the house, not looking back. I drove for hours, not sure where I was going, just needing to get away. Eventually, I ended up at a cheap motel on the edge of town. I checked in, barricaded the door, and sat in the corner with my knife, waiting for something to happen. The whispers followed me, relentless, but I was determined not to let them break me. That night, I had the worst dream yet. I was back in the warehouse, but this time, I was the one tied to the chair. Jason was there, standing over me with that same twisted smile. "They're coming for you," he whispered, over and over. I could feel cold hands touching me, pulling at me, and the pain was unbearable. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to find out what was happening and why these things were targeting me. I decided to go back to the warehouse where I found Jason. It was a crazy idea, but I felt like it was the only way to get answers. I armed myself with a baseball bat and a flashlight and headed back. The warehouse looked the same as before, old, abandoned, and eerie. I cautiously made my way inside, every sound amplified in the silence. I retraced my steps to the room where I found Jason, but it was empty. No signs of struggle, no clues, nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed a hidden door in the corner, partially obscured by debris. I forced the door open and found a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The air grew colder as I descended, and the whispers became almost deafening. At the bottom of the stairs was another room, this one filled with old, rusty equipment and blood-stained walls. In the center of the room was an old operating table with straps and chains hanging from it. As I stepped further into the room, I saw a figure in the corner. It was Jason. He looked worse than ever, gaunt, filthy, and his eyes were filled with madness. He was muttering to himself, rocking back and forth. "Jason!" I called out, my voice trembling. He looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Before I could react, I felt a sharp pain in my back. I turned around to see the masked person from the video, holding a bloody knife. I stumbled back, the pain radiating through my body. Jason just watched, a twisted smile on his face. "They promised to let me go if I brought you here," he said, almost apologetically. The masked person grabbed me, dragging me to the operating table. I fought back, but I was too weak. They strapped me down, the cold metal biting into my skin. The room spun as I tried to focus on Jason, but my vision was fading. The last thing I remember is the masked person leaning over me, their breath hot on my face. "Welcome to the family," they whispered, before everything went black. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, I was back in my house. The straps and the pain were gone, but the whispers remained. I checked my phone, no calls, no messages. It was like nothing had happened, but I knew it wasn't over. The whispers are louder now, and I can feel their presence everywhere. Jason's betrayal haunts me, and I know they're still watching. I've tried to reach out for help, but no one believes me. I'm trapped in my own personal nightmare, with no way out. If you're reading this, please be careful. Don't go looking for answers in places you shouldn't. I don't know how much longer I can hold on, but I needed to share my story. Maybe it can help someone else avoid the same fate. Stay safe, Reddit. And remember, they're always watching. A dark web game promised $10,000, but I had to survive the night first. So, I've been on Reddit for a while, and I've seen my fair share of dark web stories. Most of them sound like complete bullshit, but a couple of weeks ago, I found myself needing some quick cash. Desperation makes you do crazy things, right? It started with a random PM from a guy named Shadowmaster42. I was browsing some of the darkest subreddits, the ones you don't talk about with your friends, when I got the message. Want to make $10,000 tonight? No strings attached, just survive the night. It sounded like a scam, but $10,000 is $10,000. I responded, and Shadowmaster42 gave me a link to a hidden Tor website. After jumping through the usual hoops to access it, I found myself staring at a black screen with a single red button that said, "Accept challenge." Against my better judgment, I clicked it. Immediately, my screen filled with instructions. I was to arrive at a specified address by 10 p.m. and stay until 6 a.m. There were rules. No phones, no weapons, no leaving the premises. If I did any of these things, the deal was off. They also wanted a live stream, so they could ensure I wasn't cheating. I was skeptical, but the idea of $10,000 kept pushing me forward. The address was an old, abandoned house on the outskirts of town. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie. Dilapidated, overgrown yard, windows shattered or boarded up. As I approached the front door, my stomach churned with a mix of fear and excitement. The live stream setup was easy. They provided a body cam that I had to wear. I turned it on and entered the house. Inside, the air was thick with dust and mold. The floors creaked with every step, and the walls were covered in peeling wallpaper and grime. The only light came from the moon outside, casting long, eerie shadows. I made my way to the living room, where a single, ancient-looking armchair sat in the middle of the room. I decided to sit and wait, trying to calm my racing heart. Around midnight, things started to get weird. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath in the air. Then I heard it, a soft, whispering voice. It was coming from somewhere deeper in the house. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but the promise of $10,000 kept me rooted to the spot. I got up and followed the voice, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, leading me down a narrow hallway to a door at the end. When I opened it, I found myself in what looked like a child's bedroom. The walls were covered in faded drawings, and a broken crib sat in the corner. As I stood there, the door slammed shut behind me, and the whispering stopped. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I was plunged into darkness. When the light returned, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. A small, bloody handprint on the wall, right next to where I was standing. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers started again, louder this time, almost as if they were coming from inside my head. I stumbled back to the living room, my mind racing. What the hell had I gotten myself into? Then, without warning, the front door burst open, and a man staggered in. He was covered in blood, his eyes wide with terror. He looked at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. He collapsed at my feet, convulsing violently. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there, frozen in shock. As he lay there, dying, he grabbed my ankle with a bloody hand and managed to choke out one word: "Run." That's when I noticed the shadows. They were moving, slithering along the walls and floor like living things. I felt something cold and slimy brush against my leg, and I jumped back, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I grabbed my flashlight and ran down the hallway, looking for an exit. The shadows followed, creeping closer with every step. I found a back door and burst through it, into the overgrown backyard. I didn't stop running until I reached the tree line, the house looming behind me like a dark sentinel. I paused to catch my breath, looking back at the house. The shadows were still there, writhing and undulating in the moonlight. And then I heard it. A child's laughter, high-pitched and eerie, coming from inside the house. It echoed in the night air, sending chills down my spine. That was it. I ripped off the body cam and threw it to the ground, not caring about the money anymore. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I ran through the woods, branches slashing at my face and arms, until I reached the road. I flagged down a passing car and begged the driver to take me to the nearest town. When I finally made it home, I collapsed on my bed, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I knew I couldn't go to the police. Who would believe me? But I also knew I couldn't just forget what had happened. That night changed me. I still hear the whispers sometimes in the dead of night, and I can't shake the feeling that something is watching me. I don't know what that place was or what those shadows were, but one thing is for sure. Some things are better left alone. If you ever get a message from someone named Shadowmaster42 promising you easy money, do yourself a favor and ignore it. Some games aren't worth playing. It's been a week since that night, and I can't shake the feeling that something is still with me. The whispers haven't stopped, and now I'm starting to see things out of the corner of my eye. Fleeting shadows that disappear when I turn my head. Sleep is almost impossible, and when I do manage to drift off, the nightmares come. I see that house, the man covered in blood, and those goddamn shadows. I tried to move on, to get back to some semblance of normalcy, but it's like the experience has left a stain on my soul. I thought about telling someone, a friend, maybe a therapist, but I know how crazy it sounds. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went back on the dark web. I wanted answers. Who was Shadowmaster 42? What was that place? And why the hell was I seeing and hearing things that couldn't be real? It didn't take long to find him again. I sent a message demanding answers. To my surprise, he responded almost immediately. You survived the night. Impressive. Most don't. My blood ran cold. Most don't. What the hell did that mean? I demanded to know what was going on, and after a few tense minutes, he replied with an address and a time. Meet me if you want the truth. Every instinct screamed at me to ignore it, to just let it go. But the need for answers was stronger. I couldn't live like this, haunted by shadows and whispers. So I went. The address led me to an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was even more foreboding than the house, a crumbling, graffiti-covered ruin that looked like it hadn't seen life in decades. I checked my watch, 11:58 p.m. The meeting was at midnight. I took a deep breath and entered. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of rusted machinery and debris. The only light came from a few flickering bulbs hanging from the ceiling. I followed the sounds of my footsteps echoing in the vast space until I reached the center, where a single, dimly lit room waited. Sitting in the middle of the room, in an old metal chair, was a man, Shadowmaster 42. He looked surprisingly ordinary, late 30s, dark hair, glasses, but his eyes, there was something off about them. They were too cold, too calculating. You wanted answers, he said, motioning for me to sit. I hesitated, but finally sat across from him. What the hell was that place? I demanded. What's happening to me? He smiled, a chilling, empty smile. That place was a testing ground. A game, if you will. We find people like you, desperate for money, and see if they can survive the night. Testing ground for what? I asked, my voice shaking. For them, he replied, pointing to the shadows that had started to creep along the walls. They're not of this world. They need hosts, people who've been marked by fear. You survived, but in doing so, you became their target. I felt a chill run down my spine. You're telling me I'm haunted by these things because I played your game? Not haunted, he corrected. Marked. They're drawn to fear and pain. They feed off it. The more scared you are, the stronger they become. I could barely process what he was saying. How do I stop it? How do I get rid of them? His smile widened. You can't. Not really. But you can manage it. Face your fears. Confront the shadows. The more you understand them, the less power they have. I stood up, my heart pounding. You're insane. This is insane. I should go to the police. They won't believe you, he said calmly. And even if they did, they couldn't help you. This is your burden now. I left the warehouse, his words echoing in my mind. How the hell was I supposed to confront shadows? What did that even mean? The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with fear and confusion. That night, I locked myself in my room, determined to face whatever came. The whispers started as soon as the lights went out, and the shadows began to move. I sat on my bed, gripping a baseball bat, even though I knew it was useless. The shadows grew closer, and the whispers turned into guttural voices, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. My fear was overwhelming, suffocating, but I remembered what Shadow Master 42 had said. I had to confront them. I stood up, heart pounding, and shouted, "What do you want from me?" The shadows paused, and for a moment the room was silent. Then one of them stepped forward. It was more defined now, almost humanoid in shape, with glowing red eyes. "Your fear," it hissed. "We want your fear." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Why? What are you?" "We are the darkness," it replied. "We are the void that exists within all things. Fear gives us strength. Pain gives us life." I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. They fed on fear and pain? Fine, I had plenty of both. But if that's what they wanted, I'd give it to them on my terms. I stepped forward, my fear turning into defiance. "You want my fear? Take it, but you won't control me." The shadow recoiled, hissing in anger. The others began to retreat, fading back into the darkness. The room fell silent once more, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, exhaustion took over, and I collapsed onto the bed. The whispers were gone, and the shadows had retreated, but I knew this wasn't over. It was just the beginning. I've spent the past few days researching everything I can about these entities, trying to find a way to get rid of them for good. It's a long shot, but I have to try. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time, facing my fears and refusing to let them control me. But I can't help but wonder how many others have played this game. How many others are out there, marked and haunted by these shadows. If you ever get a message from Shadow Master 42 promising you easy money, remember my story. Some games aren't worth playing. It's been a month since that night at the warehouse. I've learned to live with the shadows, though they haven't gone away. The whispers come and go, but I've managed to keep my fear in check. Researching these entities has become an obsession, and I've discovered that I'm not alone. There are forums and message boards filled with people who have had similar experiences, people marked by the darkness. One name kept popping up in my research, Dr. Elias Klein. He's a reclusive parapsychologist who's written extensively about shadow entities and the supernatural. It took some digging, but I managed to track him down. He agreed to meet me, though he warned me over the phone that there were no guarantees. Dr. Klein's house was a large, old mansion surrounded by tall, foreboding trees. It felt like stepping into another world, one where the shadows held more sway. He was an elderly man with a frail frame but piercing, intelligent eyes. He led me to his study, a room cluttered with old books and strange artifacts. I told him everything, from the initial message from Shadow Master 42 to the shadows that now haunted my life. He listened intently, nodding occasionally, but didn't interrupt. When I finished, he sat back, his expression thoughtful. "You're dealing with what we call intradimensional entities," he explained. "They exist in a realm parallel to ours, feeding off negative emotions like fear and pain. Once they mark someone, it's very difficult to get rid of them." "How do I stop them?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "There has to be a way," he sighed. "There are no easy solutions. Confronting them, as you've been doing, helps. But there's something else you could try." It's risky, and I can't guarantee it will work, but it's your best shot." "What is it?" I asked, leaning forward. "A ritual," he said, pulling out an old leather-bound book. "An ancient one, meant to banish these entities back to their realm, but it requires great mental fortitude, and the process is harrowing. I didn't have to think twice. I'll do it, whatever it takes." He nodded and began to explain the steps. The ritual had to be performed at midnight, during a new moon. It involved a series of incantations, sigils drawn in blood, and the burning of specific herbs. The most crucial part, however, was the confrontation. I had to face the shadows directly and force them back. That night, I gathered everything I needed. Dr. Klein agreed to help, but warned that he could only do so much. The rest was up to me. We set up in the basement of his mansion, a dark, cold space that seemed to amplify the oppressive presence of the shadows. As midnight approached, I could feel the atmosphere change. The air grew heavy, and the whispers started again, more insistent this time. Dr. Klein drew the sigils on the floor with a mixture of my blood and ash, muttering incantations under his breath. At the stroke of midnight, the shadows appeared. They slithered along the walls and floor, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. I stood in the center of the circle, clutching a sprig of sage and trying to steady my nerves. "Remember," Dr. Klein said, his voice firm, "you must confront them. Show no fear." I nodded and began the incantation. The shadows writhed and hissed, but didn't retreat. The room grew colder, and I felt a pressure on my chest, like something was trying to crush the life out of me. Suddenly, one of the shadows lunged at me, its form becoming more solid, almost human-like. I stumbled back, but Dr. Klein shouted, "Stay in the circle, focus." I took a deep breath and held my ground. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted. "You have no power over me." The shadow recoiled, its form flickering. The others hissed and surged forward, but I repeated the incantation louder this time. "You have no power over me." The shadows began to waver, their forms dissolving. I felt a surge of defiance, a burning resolve that pushed back the fear. The room was filled with a blinding light, and the shadows screamed, their voices mingling in a cacophony of pain and rage. Then silence. The shadows were gone, the whispers silenced, the oppressive weight lifted, and I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. Dr. Klein helped me up, his face etched with concern. "You did it," he said, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and relief. "You really did it." I left his house at dawn, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The shadows were gone, but I knew I'd never be the same. The experience had changed me, leaving scars that would never fully heal. But I was free. And that was all that mattered. Back at home, I found a message waiting for me on my computer. It was from Shadowmaster 42. "Congratulations. Few make it this far. Your resilience is impressive." I stared at the screen, a mix of anger and fear bubbling up. I typed back, "Why? Why do you do this?" His response was immediate. "Because some people need to be reminded of what lurks in the darkness. Consider it a service." I blocked him and deleted my dark web accounts, vowing never to return. Some games aren't worth playing, and some doors should never be opened. I've learned to live with the memories, and though the fear lingers, I know I've faced the worst of it. If you ever get a message promising easy money in exchange for a night of terror, remember my story. The darkness is real, and it's hungry. Don't let curiosity lead you down a path from which there's no return. Some games, some truths, are better left in the shadows. Hey, Reddit. I'm not sure why I'm even posting this. Maybe it's a desperate cry for help, or maybe I just need to get it off my chest. Either way, I need to tell someone about what happened to me. It all started a few months ago. My life was a mess. I was drowning in debt. My girlfriend left me, and I was pretty much at rock bottom. I heard about people buying new identities on the dark web, to start fresh, escape their past. I figured, why not? What did I have to lose? I spent days digging through forums and chat rooms until I found a guy who seemed legit. He went by the name Shade. His reviews were positive, and people claimed he could get you a new identity that was bulletproof. I reached out, and he responded quickly. The price was steep, but I was desperate. He sent me a list of what he needed: a recent photo, some personal details, and a payment in Bitcoin. I complied, thinking I'd soon be sipping margaritas on a beach somewhere under a new name. How wrong I was. A week later, I received a package in the mail. It was a simple manila envelope with no return address. Inside, there was a new ID, a passport, some credit cards, and a note. The note read, "Welcome to your new life, Mr. David Carr. Be careful what you wish for." It seemed too good to be true, but everything checked out. The ID was flawless, and the credit cards worked. I started planning my escape, but weird things began happening almost immediately. First, I noticed someone was following me. At first, it was subtle, a car that seemed to be everywhere I went, a man in a hoodie who always seemed to be a few steps behind me. I brushed it off as paranoia, but it only got worse. One night, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. I walked in cautiously, and my heart nearly stopped. My place was trashed. Everything was turned upside down, drawers emptied, furniture overturned. But that wasn't the worst part. On the wall, written in what looked like blood, were the words, "You can't run from your past." I called the cops, but they didn't find anything. No fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing. They chalked it up to a random break-in, but I knew better. I felt like a trapped animal, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next shoe to drop. A few days later, I received an email from Shade. It was brief. "Enjoying your new life? Remember, there's no going back." I decided to confront him. I sent him a message demanding answers, threatening to expose him if he didn't tell me what was going on. His reply was chilling. "You wanted a new identity, and now you have one. Embrace it, or face the consequences." Then things got really disturbing. I started having these horrible nightmares. In them, I was being chased by faceless figures, trapped in a dark maze with no way out. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. And then, I started noticing things in my apartment. Small, almost imperceptible changes. A picture frame moved an inch to the left. My toothbrush switched sides. My clothes rearranged. Someone was coming into my home, and I had no idea who or why. The final straw came when I found a DVD on my doorstep. There was no note, just the disc. Curiosity got the better of me, and I played it. The video was grainy and shaky, but the message was clear. It showed me, sleeping in my bed, while someone stood over me, holding a knife. I was frozen with fear. I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed a bag and left. checking into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, but the feeling of being watched never left. I knew I couldn't run forever, but I didn't know what else to do. That's when I got the call. It was from a blocked number. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the message was clear. You can't escape. Embrace your new identity, or we'll make sure you regret it. I hung up trembling. I knew then that I was in way over my head. This wasn't just about a new identity. It was a death sentence. And the people behind it were playing a game I didn't understand. I don't know what to do. I feel like a cornered animal, constantly on edge, waiting for the next move. If anyone out there has any advice, please, I'm begging you, help me. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. TLDR. Bought a new identity on the dark web. Now I'm being stalked and threatened. Need help. Hey, Reddit. I appreciate all the responses and advice from the first part. I didn't expect this to blow up the way it did. Unfortunately, things have only gotten worse. I'm still holed up in this dingy motel, but I don't feel any safer. In fact, I think they're getting closer. After my last post, I decided to dig deeper into Shade and the dark web community. I needed to understand who was behind this and what they wanted. I went back to the forums, creating new accounts and posing as a curious newcomer looking for information. I thought maybe I'd get some answers, or at least find someone who had been through the same thing. That's when I found a thread titled "The Price of a New Life." It was buried deep in a forum dedicated to discussing illegal services. The thread was filled with horror stories similar to mine. People who bought new identities and ended up being stalked, threatened, or worse. One post stood out. It was from a user named Broken Shadow, who claimed to have been part of the operation, but managed to escape. I messaged him immediately, hoping he could shed some light on my situation. It took a few days, but he finally responded. His message was brief and cryptic. They don't sell new lives, they sell death sentences. If you want to talk, meet me at the abandoned warehouse on 5th and Maple at midnight. Come alone. I was terrified, but I had no other choice. I needed answers. So I waited until midnight and drove to the warehouse. The place was exactly what you'd expect. Dark, empty, and reeking of decay. I parked my car a few blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, heart pounding in my chest. When I arrived, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. As I got closer, I could see it was a man, probably in his late 30s, with a scruffy beard and haunted eyes. He introduced himself as Jack, aka Broken Shadow. Jack told me that he used to work for Shade. He was part of a team that created these new identities. But it wasn't just about fake documents. They collected all sorts of data on their clients, everything from their darkest secrets to their daily routines. Then they used that information to terrorize them. They get off on it, Jack said, his voice trembling. It's not about the money. It's about control. They enjoy watching people squirm, knowing they can destroy them at any moment. Jack explained that once you buy a new identity, you're trapped. They have all your information and there's no way out. If you try to run, they'll find you. If you try to expose them, they'll ruin your life. The only reason Jack was still alive was that he had dirt on Shade and his operation. But even that was a double-edged sword. It kept him alive, but it also made him a target. Before I could ask more questions, we heard a noise footsteps echoing through the warehouse. Jack's face went pale. "They're here," he whispered. "Run!" We split up, running in opposite directions. I heard shouting and the sound of a struggle behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I managed to slip out of the warehouse and back to my car. I drove for hours, not caring where I was going, just needing to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. I ended up in a small town a few states away. I checked into another motel, using cash and a fake name. I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. Every noise made me jump, convinced they had found me. The next day, I tried calling Jack, but his phone was disconnected. I feared the worst. Since then, the nightmares have gotten worse. I keep seeing Jack's face, twisted in fear, as he's dragged away by faceless figures. I've started noticing strange cars parked outside my motel, and I've gotten more threatening emails from Shade. The most recent one said, "You can't hide forever, David. We'll find you." I feel like I'm losing my mind. I've changed motels twice since then, but it doesn't help. I always feel like someone is watching me. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, and every time I see a shadow move, my heart skips a beat. I don't know how much more of this I can take. If anyone has any advice or knows how to deal with these people, please, I'm begging you. I don't want to die. I just wanted a fresh start. But now it feels like I'm living a nightmare. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep running. TLDR, met with an ex-employee of Shade who told me they're not selling new identities, but death sentences. Now I'm on the run, and they keep finding me. Need help. Hey Reddit, this will probably be my last update. Things have taken a turn for the worse, and I don't know how much time I have left. I need to get this out before it's too late. After my last post, I decided to stop running. It was clear that no matter where I went, they would find me. I needed to confront Shade and end this once and for all. I went back to the forums and contacted every person who had ever mentioned his name, hoping to find a lead. One person responded. They claimed to have a location, an old mansion on the outskirts of the town, supposedly one of Shade's hideouts. It was a long shot, but I had nothing left to lose. I armed myself with a cheap handgun I bought off the streets and headed there at dusk. The mansion was exactly what you'd expect in a horror movie, decrepit, with broken windows and overgrown weeds. I parked my car a few blocks away and made my way to the entrance, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The door creaked open and I stepped inside. The interior was dark, but I could make out the outline of furniture, covered in sheets and cobwebs, hanging from the ceiling. I moved cautiously, gun raised, listening for any sign of life. Every step echoed through the empty halls, amplifying my fear. I reached what looked like a study and found a computer still running. The screen displayed a series of surveillance feeds, each showing different angles of the mansion. Someone was definitely watching. I scanned the feeds until I saw something that made my blood run cold. One of the cameras showed the front yard, and a group of men was approaching the house. They were heavily armed and moving quickly. I panicked, frantically searching the room for a place to hide. I found a trapdoor hidden under a rug and climbed down into what seemed like an old cellar. The air was damp and musty, and the only light came from a flickering bulb overhead. I could hear the men upstairs, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. Then I heard a voice. Shade's voice. "You thought you could run, David. You thought you could hide." His tone was calm, almost amused. "We own you. There's no escape." I knew I had to act fast. I crept through the cellar, looking for another way out. I found a narrow passage that led to a tunnel. It was dark and claustrophobic. but it was my only chance. I crawled through, feeling the walls closing in around me. As I emerged on the other side, I found myself in an underground bunker. The walls were lined with screens displaying surveillance footage, and in the center of the room stood Shade. He was taller than I expected, with a gaunt face and piercing eyes. He smiled when he saw me. "Welcome, David," he said, spreading his arms wide. "You finally made it." I raised my gun, but before I could react, he was on me. He moved with a speed and precision that took me by surprise. He knocked the gun out of my hand and pinned me against the wall. "You think you're the first one to try this," he sneered. "You're nothing special, just another desperate soul looking for an escape." I struggled, but his grip was like iron. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. "What do you want from me?" Shade's smile widened. "Control. Power. It's not about the money. It's about watching you squirm, knowing I can end your life with a single command." He leaned in closer, his breath hot against my ear. "But don't worry, David. Your suffering is almost over." I felt a sharp pain in my side and looked down to see a knife buried in my flesh. Shade twisted it, and I screamed in agony. He let go, and I fell to the floor, blood pooling around me. As I lay there, fading in and out of consciousness, I saw his men enter the room. They surrounded me, their faces emotionless. Shade stood over me, wiping the blood from his hands. "Goodbye, David," he said, his voice cold and final. "The last thing I remember is the darkness closing in, the sound of my own heartbeat slowing to a crawl. I thought of all the mistakes I made, all the things I should have done differently, but it was too late. My new identity had become my death sentence. I don't know if anyone will ever find this. Maybe it's a warning, or maybe it's just my final confession. But if you're reading this, please, don't make the same mistake I did. The dark web is a place of nightmares, and some deals are too good to be true." TLDR, confronted Shade in an old mansion, got ambushed, and now I'm dying. Don't buy a new identity on the dark web.